You're listening to PatchBay on TYM KRS.
Welcome to PatchBay. So, like last week, we were talking about vinyl and stuff, and yeah, I'm really excited to try to do that. I was on the interwebs there looking for places to cut records into acetate plates and stuff, and then Shane went sort of crazy talking about tapes, which I've actually done, by the way.
You've done cassettes, yeah?
Yeah, tape
Sure.
duplication and
Fun.
live performance direct to tape and then having to make 40 copies of it within 10 minutes after to sell.
Thank God for high-speed dubbing. They they do that with CDs, which still amazes me. I mean, you can make MP3s or whatever during the show, or make a rough mix, and then, but at the end of the show, like I know you can buy Pearl Jam CDs of the show that night, and it just boggles my brain that they can duplicate that many that quickly. Yeah, cassettes are fun.
Yeah, it's a fun technology. We didn't have time last week, but I was going to sort of bring up how the tracks work on a cassette because I don't think most people really get it. They got the, side one, side two, side A, side B.
Mhm.
Um, the way that magnetic tape works, the magnetic field actually goes all the way through.
Right.
So it's not like you can record your signal on one side of the
Uh,
thing.
well, yeah, no, you can't. But I mean, well, it depends on the playback medium, obviously, right? Like a regular cassette that you would buy, there's technically four tracks on the machine, which is why cassette four tracks work. But left and right stereo on side A, left and right stereo on side B,
Hmm.
or your four tracks on a cassette, like a four-track cassette recorder, like a Tascam or Portastudio.
Yeah, so basically they have the width of the tape separated into four um tracks, four little strips running from beginning to end. And the first one and the third one are for side A, and the
Mm-hmm.
second one and the fourth one are for side B. And if you ever wondered how they actually managed to have stereo and two sides on a tape, it's a trick of the physical way that things are laid out. When you take that tape out, flip it over, put it back in, you've now moved the two strips on the read head
The
from
other way
being
around.
oriented in one way to being oriented on the other, so it's getting the other two, and that's why they interleaved them. I don't know. I've always found it interesting.
And that's how you can do all kinds of fun backward stuff as well when you're recording on a four track, because it's reading the tape. It reads the tape the same way like a 24 track tape machine would work. It's just one way. Whereas when you're talking about a stereo cassette that you'd play and listen to in your house, you have two tracks going one way, and then you flip it over and you have two tracks going the other way. So I've done that a few times, although it's entertaining to try and record to, because if you're trying to record a backwards part on the other side of the tape, um, you need to play to stuff playing backwards to you, which is, I don't know. Have you ever done that?
If I did, it was a very long time ago.
Yeah, it's entertaining. I mean, the cool thing is when you do record the right way on the backwards side, when you flip it back over and you play it back, then you get your part backwards and everything else plays the right way. But it's tricky to. It's almost easier if you have a sampler to play it and then sync it up. But well, I don't know. It's 60 of one and 40 of the other, I guess. But yeah, no, that it's an interesting medium. This the same idea with 24 track tape. There's slots for each track. I've read somewhere that, like, to try and remove a click, guys would count. Um, like, 'cause you can't see them obviously, but they would use a ruler and then measure it out and then cut out sort of where the click track was prior to the start of the song, which is super engineering.
Wow. There's all sorts of cool, um, interesting physical bits that one needs to know when dealing with those reel to reel tape decks. Like, I suppose some of these could probably apply to a cassette too, but if you have your mix too hot, the record head is gonna magnetize it too much,
Mm.
and it's gonna affect the tracks next to that track.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I mean the thing about like 24 track tape. I've never worked on 2-inch recording. I've transferred 2-inch, but I worked on 1-inch 24 track, which is quite a lot less room per track. But you can get crosstalk and bleed between tracks as well, especially like you say, got one that's quite hot and the next one that is a little lower in volume. That was sort of the reason for compressors in the first place, was to try and get
Make sure everything
much level
stays
on
in
the
its
tape.
little hole there.
Exactly. And then, technically speaking, we don't really have use for compressors as much anymore for what they were originally intended for. Now it's an effect rather than you know,
Well,
a necessity.
if you're trying to squeeze your signal into a very specific range, it's still useful.
Yeah,
I use compressors all the time when I'm recording podcasts because we want to be able to get things up to broadcast audio levels. So the peaks all have to swing all the way to the top of the bit width
for sure.
that we have available in the digital compression. But it's a completely different animal than it was back then.
Yeah.
Another cool one is that when a tape is sitting on a reel, it's literally magnetized metal, sandwiched between two layers of plastic. So you've got this huge magnetic thing sitting there, and as the tape winds up on itself, if the magnetic field is particularly strong in a spot, it can actually change the magnetic polarization of the tape above and below it in the reel.
Mhm.
So that's, I think they call that print through.
That would be no print through is when you leave a reel tails in. The what the standard practice for that might also be considered crosstalk. What you're talking about, the standard practice for when you finish with a reel is to fast forward it to the end, so that all the layers are underneath each other. So if you have, like, say, a quarter-inch stereo master with 12 songs, you want to have the master, when you put it away, have it at the end of the reel rather than at the start, because what tends to happen is if you leave it the practice is called tails out, is the way you leave it. But if you leave it the other way, like tails in, you get ghost notes of the previous um, layer of tape. You following me?
Yeah, I totally
Yeah.
get you.
So if you have a dead section of music, sometimes you'll hear like the audio from the previous layer of tape, and we're talking like 200, 300, 400 feet of tape. I've had so much experience transferring like quarter-inch tapes. Um, that's a whole process that I can talk about for a little bit if you want me to.
Well, yeah, I mean, why were you transferring? Is it just moving the masters and stuff over to a digital
Yeah,
format?
yeah. The stuff that we had was from 1974. So when I first started working there, I had somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 quarter-inch tapes to go through and transfer. To double check and see if they had already been done and were on DAT, then transfer to DAT. But a lot of them were not only left tails out, but they were left as what we used to call a pancake. So what they would do is they would have the reel casing, which usually has 3 screws. They would take the screws off and then just leave the pancake of the reel in a box.
Oh,
So you needed to like uh, it was really tricky. But what you do is you put one of the parts of the reel onto the pancake, then you flip it over, you take the box off, then you put the other part on, and then you screw it in very carefully, or else it will fall apart. Like you have to. It requires extreme amounts of patience.
Yeah, because there's nothing holding that tape in place at that point. Yeah,
Nothing.
how did
No.
they even get it into the box like that? They must
Those
have done
guys
the
were pros.
opposite.
Yeah, exactly. What you do is you take off one side, you put the box back on top, and the thing is, if you look at one of those boxes, you usually have an indent of where the quarter-inch tape would sit, and it usually still had the plastic ring that the tape was originally wound around, but and so the divot inside the box would fit inside that. Yeah, so that was fun. And then a lot of times what I would have to do, like I transferred the whole lot over the course of about 2 or 3 years. Um, you'd have to like massage the tape, and which isn't playing very white, but
Oh, oh.
what I mean it could work, but what you'd
Late
have to do,
night in the studio, just
yeah,
you and the
exactly,
reels. Mm.
coffee, and yeah, it
Mm.
was good. What you would do is you'd put the reel on, put another blank reel on, and you would fast forward and rewind it about 8 times before you did the transfer. Because what would tend to happen, especially the tapes would sit so long, each layer of tape would stick together. And so what would happen is if you just played the darn thing, it would only play for about a minute and a half, and then it would stop dead, which is good for transferring, right? You have to sort of re-energize the particles and loosen everything up a little bit. Another thing that you can do when you have those types of problems is actually bake the tape, which I don't.
So, like, heat it up?
Yeah,
Huh.
and the problem with that is you only really get one chance to do it. So I wouldn't do it unless you know somebody who can come and hang out with you who's done it before. But what I've done in the past is I think you get them warmed up to about 140 degrees, if I'm not mistaken. Usually build like a cardboard box, get a blow dryer, put about 6 tapes in there, and warm them up, and then run them. But usually only got about one chance, and then after that they sort of tend to fall apart or start shedding and flaking and stuff.
Yeah, there's guys out there whose entire life is just being able to save old stuff like reel-to-reel tapes and films and books and all that sort of thing. Yeah, I've seen various documentaries on this stuff, and yeah, really,
It's
really
ugly work.
interesting tricks that you have to know to be able to do that kind of thing. I'm glad that that you've been able to mess with the reel-to-reel stuff, though. I would really love to find one and get it back up and running and working here in our studio.
I have a at work. I have a quarter-inch um, Tascam machine um, that's sort of semi-pro that seems to have been able to do the job pretty well for me as far as transfers are concerned. I actually have one here at home that just sitting in my closet. It's mono though. It's actually a really old, like in the box kind of unit. I'll send you a picture. Uh, Maybe I can ship it to you. Might be fun to try.
Yeah. Well,
Sticker.
mono would be great as an effect, I think, so you can get that tape saturation thing going on. But what I would
Yeah.
really like is like a 4 track. Yeah, with yeah, not
The task.
two stereo, but an actual 4 track. I think that'd be really fun to play with.
Yeah, the one I have is just a stereo 2 track, but there are quite a lot out there actually. It's just a matter of finding one at a reasonable deal. I mean, the most of the sort of audio dudes out there have taken the Studers and the Ampexes and that kind of stuff. But I mean, there's tons of like Tascam type ones or Yuri or Teak. There's tons of Teak ones out there. It's just a matter of chasing one down.
And if somebody has like a washing machine sized cart set up with their reels facing up and all that, and they want to donate it, just let me know. I'll
Yeah,
make that happen.
we'll figure it out. The UPS bill might be kind of crazy, but yeah,
I will go pick that up, honestly. We drive all over the place a couple of times a year, and that's the sort of thing that I would definitely like be willing to drive to pick up because
put,
man, oh man, those are cool.
yeah, put it on the map exactly. Yeah, no, they're a lot of fun. I mean, they can be a super pain in the butt, but they are a lot of fun. I was gonna say about the other thing about tape machines too is that when you're transferring them, you really have to clean the crap out of them. I've gone through boxes of Q-tips and alcohol, and the thing about doing a transfer is usually I would clean the head, massage the tape. Some flexive tape would end up on the heads and pinch rollers and stuff like that. Clean them again before I actually did the transfer. But the thing about alcohol and tape is you have to let the alcohol dry, because if you leave a wet alcohol and then you transfer the tape, it's going to eat away at the tape after the fact. So it was this big process of, you know, clean it, wait 10 minutes, 15 minutes, transfer it, or massage it, clean it again, wait 10 minutes. Like, it's a whole night to do, 20 minutes of audio or 40 minutes of audio sometimes.
There's really good reasons why we switched over to digital for storing these things. Really, really good reasons.
Well, the other thing, yeah, just storage alone. I've had tapes that came off with that had actual mold growing on the tapes that still managed to transfer, but I had flecks of green crap falling on the floor as I transferred it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I know. That was a 1972 tape. But yeah, no, as far as
now did that add mojo to the track, or
there was already mojo to begin with, but
the moss didn't take any away?
The high end might have been a little suspect, but I mean, at that point in time, it on occasion it comes down to, well, this is the only version of this that we have. you know I remember doing a transfer. Well, I did a bunch of transfers for another record company, which will remain nameless, but I remember them sort of giving me heck about how long it took me to do a transfer, and they would sort of say, well, we only want this song off the tape. And I'd say, well, it's not, I have to transfer the whole thing. I can't fast forward and rewinding it, especially that fragile, is a bad idea. Like, you've got to be splicing stuff, especially when it starts breaking on you. And like I say, it's 20 minutes just to clean the heads and get it prepped to transfer before you even start. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can't even begin to think. And you had to do an entire collection?
Yeah, I did 2 skids of transfers for these guys. And so there were like 4x4x4, and they're all 1/4-inch tapes, so you can imagine how many I did for them. And that wasn't for the company I was working for. This was a custom thing. But as time went on, they were sort of like, well, we'd only like you to do this song or that song, but it doesn't speed up the process. The same as, well, not the same as transferring a record, because you can sort of pick it, but it depended on who the engineer was. A lot of the stuff that I transferred that was Sunshine Records stuff, there was leader tape, and so you could kind of figure out where tune 3 was. But on some of this other stuff, it was just tape with a 5-second gap, and the next tune would come in. So it's a crapshoot to figure out where the next tune comes up.
So the place that you work, Sunshine, that's been open for how long now?
They've been around since 74.
74.
Yeah.
So they have some serious back catalog, old media stuff then.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, there's and my next process is going to be the DAT tapes. There's something like 400 DAT tapes that I need to start shuffling through and transferring to CD, which is a little easier. You don't have to babysit it as much. But finding a DAT machine that works well nowadays is not exactly easy.
Now, for the listeners out there who aren't familiar with it, DAT, could you just go down it real quick? What is it?
Digital audio tape. It's the same idea as it's I guess the master. So before, when you were mixing, you would be mixing off 24-track machine to 1/4-inch stereo, and then as time went on, tape got more expensive, and digital came out, and everybody was excited about it. So you would record on still 24-track, tape, or you'd be recording on ADAT in your stereo medium. Instead of being a quarter-inch machine, would be a DAT machine. And you would have session DATs, mixed DATs, production DATs that were the ones sent to the plant to make the CD masters or cassette masters. So there was and basically it's the same technology as VHS. It's like a helical scanning head. It pulls the tape in and reads it really fast. The same idea as it's still tape, but it works like the way a VHS machine works.
And that uses SVHS tapes, right?
No, DAT tapes are ADATs are SVHS tapes. DATs are really small. They're smaller than video tape. I'm trying to think of like S or 8mm. I'm not really sure what video tapes are like, but they're smaller than like a DV cam. They're smaller than DV cam tapes.
Gotcha.
And the thing about that technology, if anybody's ever had a VHS sort of break, like the tape break, and then you tape it together, it doesn't work, because what's happening is there's zeros and ones being printed on the tape, not actual audio that we know, like analogous waveform type audio. It's zeros and ones basically, and they were 16-bit or 16-bit 44. And then they made consumer DATs, because for a time, all these audio files, they were trying to talk audio files into buying DATs, which is entertaining, but they were all at 48.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Why would audiophiles want DATs? That's digital audio. Wouldn't they want an analog format? They're audiophiles. I mean...
Well, no, but at the time, this is when CDs first came out, and the big problem with CDs was can't make a mixtape, right? The only thing you could do to make a mixtape and preserve the quality, you couldn't preserve the quality at the time. You had a really expensive CD player with a separate expensive DA converter, but if you wanted to make a mixtape, you'd still have to make an actual mix cassette. So what the point of the consumer DATs at the time were to allow people to do an analog to analog transfer from CD to DATs. And the cool thing about DATs is you can pre-program in the start and end IDs the same as you would on a really decent mastering program, where you could have track 1, be able to flip it, track 1, track 2, track 3. It has to fast forward, but it's still, you have the ability to do that, which you can't do on a cassette mixtape, right?
There's been a lot of interesting formats over the years. Yeah.
They did not last long. And the trick with what they did, the reason they made it 48 was because of piracy. You couldn't do a digital to digital transfer from a CD player if you had a digital out on your CD player, because your DAT machine that you could buy was 48. So you'd have jitter and you'd have word clock problems and stuff like that if you tried to transfer from a CD to. You'd end up with slower audio, right?
Yeah, interesting abuse of how it works to make it less useful.
The whole point of like beta, or like like DVD-Rs and stuff like that. Like when DVDs first came out, I can't remember how many gigs a regular DVD you would buy is, but it's more than the 4.2 you can put on a burnable one. And the reason for that was people had to, at first, you couldn't copy a DVD, right? Until you learned how to compress it.
Yeah, well, yeah. Some of us could, but yeah.
Yeah, well, now it's much more commonplace to be able to do it and do it well. But I'm talking about when they first came out, there was a reason that because they made that mistake with CDs. When CDs came out, you could buy a blank CD that you could burn that was the same length as a regular commercial CD. If they would have made CDs, 300 megs instead of 650 or 800 or whatever, you would have had possibly a few less problems. But
well, I don't know. It depends on who you are, on whether or not you define that as a problem or not. Yeah, I'm sure in the recording industry they probably see that as kind of a problem that there was enough room to just copy a CD straight over. But before we get away from DATs,
Mhm.
um, ADAT and DAT, what's the main difference there? Is ADAT later?
ADAT is Alesis digital audio tape, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
It was created by Alesis, which at the time was sort of the Behringer of the 80s and 90s. Not that there's anything wrong with either of those two, but
There's no subtext here at
no.
all.
Well, it was really affordable at the time. But an ADAT machine was a modular 8-track digital audio recorder. Works the same idea as uh, tape machine. I have 4 in my studio right now. They're holding the door open. Uh, they recorded at 16-bit, 48K, and there was 8 tracks, and that's where ADAT optical came about.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's what I was sort of getting around to, and letting you explain what it was first.
So yeah, originally they were, and most people that I know had a 32 channel, 24 channel, usually a Mackie board, sometimes the Alesis Studio One boards, um, and yeah, it was the same idea, same concept of recording as recording a tape, but the storage medium was better. It still is better as far as I'm concerned, provided you can get an ADAT machine that still works well, but the tapes are fine. Um, and they record on SVHS tapes. I don't know why you couldn't use VHS tapes. I'm sure there was some issue there, but you actually had to format them for ADATs before you could record them. So for a while, I think we had 8 machines, and we used to have 2 just formatting tapes that would just sit in the corner, and you just hit record because it format in real time. So you'd have to basically hit record format and record 40 minutes of audio. I believe it was 38.
Fun, yeah.
Yeah, so
We're
that's
so
why.
spoiled these days.
Yeah,
So in my studio, the only thing left of that era is the ADAT, what do they call it? Light pipe.
right.
Their digital audio transport format, which is sort of it runs over the same kind of port and cable that you'd use for what is it? SPDIF optical, Toslink.
Yeah, Toslink. Same idea. There's 2 different versions. There's a digital Toslink that's only 2 channel, and then there's same kind of cable does 8 channel, but that's the ADAT format. The original intent for that was to do digital backups. So you would get, say you had 16 tracks audio on 2 different machines, you get 2 machines, sync them together, and then you make a digital duplicate copy of it. That was originally what they were meant for. And then
Hmm.
some guys figured out when they got like Digio ones that they could use those as an external sync.
Which is fun.
Record.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Um,
how I learned. Well, part of one of the things that we record 8 channels to the old one, and we record 8 channels to the ADAT, and then basically ADAT it into the 001. So yeah, I mean you'd have some weird stuff, but it would work.
I've got my main audio interface here sort of died earlier this year.
Oh God, that's getting.
Thankfully, I'm friends on Twitter with one of the engineers at the company that made it, and he said, send it over, and I did, and he fixed it for me and sent it back. But I still had to be recording, for those weeks, so I ended up buying a little, oh, what is it? Phonic Firefly 8-channel rack mount. Um, lowest common denominator sort of interface, but it does have an ADAT light pipe port on the back, and that was intriguing. I thought because I know that the if you're not using the analog circuitry in that box, then it's actually a pretty decent box because you're basically just pulling it in through the ADAT and then into the FireWire into the computer. So if
Yep.
you use like a really good 8-channel, 8-tube pre's or something with an ADAT out feeding that sucker, you'd actually have a really high quality input coming into your DAW.
The only thing is the metering. is a bit suspect. Um, when you're clipping on the ADAT, it's hot coming in digitally, like super hot. So because I've done transfers, like direct transfers with a Motu not 896, but a Motu, yeah, 896. They have 3 ADAT ins and outs. So I was able to do 16 channel or 24 channel transfers from some of the old ADAT stuff, which was another thing I did, was transfer a bunch of the multi-track files of some of the stuff we had. And there, yeah, you have to watch the metering. Like it's not this like you used to have to set, like set up a console and a tape machine and make sure everything was everything was zero nominal, and so your zero on the channel on the console is the same as zero on the tape machine. But yeah, like they do tend to be, at least in my experience, tend to be a little bit hotter. But yeah, no, you're right. The ability to use them, and it does, it's cool. I mean, and they sound good, and if you, like you say, if you're using a decent mic pre, you can get some pretty killer tones out of them.
Yeah, because you're basically, you've got yourself a really, yeah. There's some good ADCs out there, but you're basically building your own Firewire ADC that's actually has really good pre's and really good um, uh, ADCs built on to that on that side of things. So you can put your money into one of those without having to put all the extra crap in there to have a USB port or Firewire, any of the feature creep sort of things that we see, and just let the cheap little interface do that for you, which is nice.
The only problem is that they're 16-bit 48. That's it.
There's more than one mode on them now.
The newer
You
ones, but
can't
the
do,
originals
I
were
don't think you can
blackface.
do 8 on them. I think you can only do 4 channels, but you can get it up to 96, which is completely usable for everything I do.
No, well, the like, yeah, not the original, like the ones I'm talking about, like the original blackface ADATs are 1648. You can't get any higher of a sampling rate off of
Mm-hmm.
them. Even if, I mean, they have to be slaved to the word clock on whatever DAW you're using, but and most um, like a PreSonus Digimax kind of preamp, they're 2448. They're not, like, they started making 96 ones, and then you can do the four channel. Like the Elisa's came out with that HD 24, which was same idea as an ADAT, but worked on like IDE cartridge hard drives, which I always found was sort of exciting. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So on that bad boy, you could record 24 channels at 16-bit 48 or something, or you could record 12 channels at 2496. No, 24. Yeah, it was 2444, 24 channels, or 2496. You could only do 12. And that might have been just the limitations of the hard drive, or maybe the transfer. I'm not really sure, but yeah, no, ADAT, that was, I think, their award winner right there, because I'm sure they're getting residuals from every company that puts an ADAT optical port on their, preamp or whatever, right?
Probably, yeah. But you
I'm
know what?
think.
We're out of
Mhm.
time.
I was gonna say, I was thinking that either we were out of time or we'd have to split the show in half. All right, cool. So
Yeah,
we're out of
well,
time officially.
yeah, we are out of time, but if you guys like this sort of technical stuff of how this stuff works, let us know. We can talk more technical, or we could talk more practical using this stuff. It doesn't really matter to us. I think we both do both.
We both do both equally well, I think. Anyway, but yeah, no, you're right. I'm good with flipping back and forth as well. I definitely want to know what other people think. That would
Yeah,
be always a good thing.
you guys can email us at feedback@tymkrs.com, or you can get on Twitter. Both of our Twitters are listed on the About page on patchbay.tv, which is where you can find this show every Friday. There's an RSS feed, which should be working. And there, before too long, there will also be an iTunes link. We're waiting for them to add us. You know, waiting for iTunes.
We have a whole episode eventually. We could discuss iTunes.
Oh,
As
really? Yeah,
topic,
that's a good one. I've
actually.
dealt with them a little bit with the podcasting, so I've got some gripes. I can rant a little bit.
I can
Anyway,
also rant about them. But yeah, okay, cool. Well, have a good night.
yep.